Now it is that time of the month again where we get our good friend Ambassador Yunyo Chol into the studio to have a bit of a chat in depth about diplomatic issues happening around the world and specifically focusing on Asia, where his expertise are unparalleled on this network, that's for sure. Ambassador Yoon, it's always a pleasure to have you here. How you doing, mate?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad at all, yeah. Feeling good, yeah. Cruising through the autumn now.
Right.
Autumn's quite nice in Korea. We don't really get it in Australia, so it's a bit of a novelty, yeah?
Very cool.
It is, yeah. That's a lot nicer, isn't it? A lot more comfortable. Well, what are we going to discuss today then, Ambassador?
Well, it's already been almost 3 weeks, but the world marked the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So let's have a look back on what happened and think about its implication for the current world.
Right. It's, it's insane, isn't it? It is 20 years ago. I was in high school when this happened, and I do remember it fairly vividly, actually, almost the day the world really changed, no matter where you were in the world. So how did it happen? Young listeners might not even remember this event, yeah?
Right. In the morning of September 11th, 2001, 2 commercial aircraft under the control of the terrorist groups rammed into 2 towers of World Trade Center in New York, which was the symbol of American power and prosperity. The high temperature created by the aircraft fuel and the structure of the building around the steel beams brought the sudden collapse of the towers, and it killed thousands of people trapped inside and the firefighters who had come to their rescue. And in the same morning, there were 2 other flights the terrorists hijacked. One slammed into the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense Department building, and the other, the famous Flight 93, was prevented from making a similar attack as some heroic passengers fought off those terrorists on their flight. So this heinous crime claimed the lives of 265 passengers, which included terrorists, and 2,606 inside the building and area, and 125 at the Pentagon.
Yeah, it remains the biggest attack ever taken place on American soil, and it has scarred the psyche of America since that day, and it probably forever will. It's up there on par now, I believe, with the American Civil War as one of those turning points in American history. So, personally, where were you when it happened then?
I was in New York.
Really?
Yeah. In my office at the United Nations, making preparation for the opening of the General Assembly, where the Korean Foreign Minister, Dr. Han Sung-soo, was supposed to be elected as President of the 56th United Nations General Assembly. But obviously, it was postponed due to the chaos that followed the attack. And there was a rumor that the United Nations was the next target.
Right.
So everybody got panicked. And with the collapse of the building, they also lost the communication tower. So our cell phones didn't work, making the situation much worse. So I managed to get home around midnight, riding taxi and then a train and whatever was available. And the General Assembly reopened the next day to elect Dr. Han, who worked to unite the international community against the threat of international terrorism.
Right. It was thrust onto the forefront, wasn't it, terrorism, from that very day. Now, we mentioned that it had a tremendous impact on America and Americans, but it also did have a tremendous impact on the rest of the world, did it not?
It did. So as you mentioned, it was the first time that the United States was attacked at the mainland. And it happened when the U.S. was enjoying its monopolistic power. It was 10 years after the end of Cold War. And Russia was still trying to figure out its place in the world. And China was still working on its economic development after joining World Trade Organization. So after winning the Cold War, the U.S. was concentrating on globalization. Globalization is not about traveling to around the world, but removing the barriers to the economic efficiency and maximizing the benefit to the people on the global scale. So it was the time of euphoria and confidence when this attack took them by surprise. So it changed the course of the world for decades to follow.
Right, we have never been the same again, have we? But how has it changed, really?
Well, first of all, the surprise attack, in a way, revived the presence of George W. Bush as war president. Actually, he was suffering from a weak economy and unimpressive leadership. But the war on terror became the haunting theme, which gave Mr. Bush another term and brought in so-called neocons, a new breed of conservatives who didn't practice their traditional realism of minimal intervention abroad, but believed that they could change the authoritarian regimes in the Middle East into democracies. So they ran the U.S. foreign and security policies for a while and rushed the United States into the Iraq war, on top of the inevitable invasion of Afghanistan to punish Al-Qaeda and Taliban. So this attack also heralded the advent of non-state actors in tandem with international terrorism as the new threat that the global community had to deal with. The likes of Al-Qaeda threatened the existing regimes in the region. Some regimes were toppled with the Arab Spring in 2011, but were not replaced with democracies, but gave fertile ground for those non-state terrorist groups like Islamic State.
Yes, Islamic State, especially IS, Islamic State, sprung out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and look, they're still causing havoc in Syria. Syria is still sort of suffering from its own civil war, which is somewhat of a proxy of what's happened in Iraq and throughout the Middle East. But the Middle East has copped the brunt of the war on terror for sure. But what about the rest of the world?
Well, this turn of events also had the important significance in global strategic balance, because the United States' preoccupation with the war on terror and its never-ending work of nation-building in Iraq and Afghanistan gave the space for Russia and China. Bush called them strategic competitors when he was on campaign trail, but he couldn't follow up with his platform because already there's a new focus on terror in the wake of 9/11, and Russia and China started to quietly gain ground. And particularly after 2008 financial crisis, China emerged from shadow as the engine of global economic growth. And now they are waiting to replace the United States as the biggest economy in the world. And particularly, again, in 2012, the Chinese Communist Party elected Mr. Xi Jinping as new leader, who was different from his predecessors in that he was not shy about claiming China's rightful place in the world on the crest of nationalism and pride of his people with their economic prowess.
Right. Now, with all this happening around the world, and especially talking about the Asian century, which has been, or America's pivot towards Asia as well, but Afghanistan was somewhat of a bit of a thorn in America's side because not a massive amount of progress had been made. And this was the excuse that Biden had given for the withdrawal from Afghanistan, yeah?
Yes. The exit from Afghanistan in August, I think it was 15th, signaled Mr. Biden's determination to put an end to the era of wrong strategy and misplaced obsession. However inglorious and shameful its very exit may have looked. Of course, the negotiation on the withdrawal was done by President Trump because he thought it was what the American people wanted.
Right.
Bring our boys back home. That was what he was campaigning about. And Biden, on the other hand, honored the deal made by Trump, but on a different reason. During the Obama era, as vice president, he was the one against the surge and the nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan. Biden thought the United States should stop wasting resources on a country that was not at all prepared to defend itself, and that the U.S. Should refocus on the real challenge. So he chose the date of 20th anniversary of 9/11 as the deadline to bring a closure to the 2 decades of sacrifice and waste. It's just that they didn't know how corrupt the Afghan government and army was and how tilted the Afghan people were toward Taliban, which all led to this rapid crumble beyond expectation and the fall of Kabul in mid-August.
Right. The writing was on the wall and people thought, well, the Taliban are eventually going to hold some sort of power. Just how much it was going to be in Afghanistan was unknown. But nobody really believed that it was going to collapse so quickly. And maybe we didn't get the intelligence right again, or maybe we didn't listen to the intelligence. But there were some also voices here in Korea that were pointing at the Americans and saying, well, look, this is another example of the Americans and what they do when they desert their allies, yeah?
Right. Some people in Korea rang the alarm bell about the possibility of withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Korea, according to their so-called national interest, just as they did in Afghanistan. But Korea is different from Afghanistan in many ways. Korea is a treaty ally of the United States, which Afghanistan was not.
Of course, yeah.
And Korea shares with the United States strategic interests and important values of liberal democracy and market economy, particularly with the strategic competition between the United States and China getting into full swing. The United States will need to work more closely with Korea. Nevertheless, the Korean people should be mindful that whenever Korea is seen as lacking in the will and capability to defend itself, and if the United States domestic politics so dictates, anything can happen.
That's the thing, isn't it? You can't always rely on your allies. You'd like to think you can, but things change, right? And the American public do dictate a lot of who becomes president and what they prioritize. So what is the strategic roadmap as you see it for the U.S. going down the road?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of Afghan collapse, there was a lot of ridicule for the U.S. unpreparedness. But some analysts say that the burden of dealing with the instability in Afghanistan has now been shifted to China, which has a narrow border along its Xinjiang province of Muslim Uyghur population. China had already made a very smart move of having meetings with the Taliban leadership, claiming that it would pursue a policy of harmonizing mutual interests, not lecturing its own values. Still, some people say that due to Taliban's decentralized structure, those Afghans on the border may make trouble about Muslim brothers on the other side, which also can be wishful thinking on the part of the West. We will see. On the other hand, there are voices in the U.S. and Europe that despite this withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States should and will continue to play the role of defending liberal democracy around the world from any threat of illiberal or authoritarian sources.
Right, that is an interesting point there. It is now imperative on China. And you do make a good point there. China has been less on the side of sort of lecturing countries about their politics and more on, because they have been more focused, I suppose, on making economic partnerships. But we'll see what they do with the Taliban. But we've got another issue that's popped up in the region, yeah?
Right. So this strategic move that the United States now wishes to focus on has put your country, Australia, at the center of the game.
Yeah, so tell us what's happened, what have the Aussies done, and what does it mean?
You heard about this awkward name called AUKUS?
Yes, I have. Studied it back at uni, yeah.
Right. The three leaders of Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States announced on September 15th their trilateral security pact for their cooperation on cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum mechanics, and undersea capabilities. With undersea capabilities, the United States and United Kingdom will help Australia's acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines. The United States has never provided such cooperation except the UK. Even though the pact doesn't mention China, it is obvious that this cooperation is aimed at the military edge in the Indo-Pacific region, checking Chinese naval operations. But France is the one who got very angry.
Yeah, so tell us, the French are very angry. They're very angry with us in Australia, but why are the French so angry?
Yeah, France had a $90 billion deal with Australia about developing a dozen of conventional diesel submarines. But they got the notification of the cancellation of this deal only a few hours before the announcement of AUKUS. And the French government got so furious, accusing this group of Anglo-Saxon countries of backstabbing them, and expressed their utmost dissatisfaction by recalling their ambassadors from Australia and the United States, while calling the British opportunists. So and at the same time, France is playing this up as U.S. neglect of the EU as a whole, fanning the European anxiety about the U.S. security commitment. But this funny guy, the UK, United Kingdom Prime Minister, Mr. Boris Johnson, ridiculed the French reaction by quibbling with the French and English expression, prenez un grip, donnez-moi un break. Give me a break, get a grip, my God. So
he's prone to a gaffe, old Boris, isn't he? Yeah.
It went a little too far.
Yeah.
But recently, the United States and France tried to patch things up after the phone call between Presidents Biden and Macron on September 22nd. Their statements indicated the U.S. regret that the situation would have benefited from open consultation among allies on matters of strategic interest to France and other European partners. So the two presidents agreed to meet in October, and the French ambassador returned to the United States. So they are having worst bilateral relations since 2003 when Iraq war happened.
Yeah, and the French were not happy with that as well. And the Americans were rather rebuffed by the French opposition to the Iraq War. We all remember the joke about freedom fries and maybe even sending the Statue of Liberty back to France with a little mustache drawn on her. But look, Australia is having a hard time with China at the moment, and a lot of people domestically in Australia have questioned this decision as well, yeah?
Yeah, you should know better than I do about what has happened. But Australia raised the need for an independent inquiry into the origin of COVID-19, which, of course, angered China, its biggest trade partner. And China bullied Australia with its assertive diplomacy and economic coercion. But with this, AUKUS alliance, some analysts say that China scored its own goal in terms of a football game by pushing Australia into this strategic partnership with the U.S. and UK when United States was exactly looking for such an opportunity to contain the rise of China. So there are even reports. I mean, you have seen the reports about electricity shortage in some parts of China, and some people say that it's because they embargoed the import of Australian coals.
Right. We do power a lot of China,
right?
On Australia.
Yeah, but still, China's official response to this new development was rather mild, just accusing the AUKUS of the Cold War mentality, which is, I think, China's refrain matching U.S. refrain of rules-based order,
right?
While other Chinese media warned more harshly that Australia will be punished with no mercy or will be the target of their nuclear weapons.
Right. Yeah. Look, the Chinese obviously not happy with it. They see what's happening. They know what's happening, and it does look like a U.S. refocus in Asia, another maybe pivot 2.0, seems to be really happening. Yeah.
Right. So on top of what happened with the nuclear submarine, U.S. is activating a variety of networks to strengthen its position in the Indo-Pacific region. So in September 24th, President Biden had the first ever in-person Quad summit at the White House with his counterparts from India, Japan, and Australia. And their declared agenda covered areas of cooperation from ending COVID-19 pandemic, combating climate crisis, to space and cybersecurity. But the focus seems to be again keeping an open, free, and rules-based Indo-Pacific.
Right.
So the U.S. is already maintaining Five Eyes, the intelligence gathering alliance from the days of World War II, which also includes Canada and New Zealand. And there are discussions in U.S. Congress to expand this group to include Japan and Korea,
right,
to tighten its containment around China. To this was recently added, as we said, the military cooperation of AUKUS. But there is news about the recent release of Gwangju of Huawei. So it could be a signal of cooling down this tension a little bit. But anyway, China will have to think hard to find a way to loosen this encirclement. And the Korean government will also need to think about how to keep the balance between the two most important friends, security-wise and trade-wise.
Yeah, it's a big move.
But Korea currently is already in the fever of presidential election campaigns. I hope the candidates who wish to lead this country are well aware of the dynamics around the world and have a serious discussion about the road ahead to guarantee, once again, the survival and prosperity of the Korean people.
Right, well, that's going to be their first and foremost responsibility, isn't it? It's always a difficult part of the world to navigate in Northeast Asia, and I tell you what, the 21st century is probably going to be as interesting as any century for this region. We have run out of time there, though. If you do wish, folks, to listen to the entire interview that I had with the ambassador today, you will be able to find that online at gfn.or.kr. But as for now, Ambassador, we'll catch you again next time.
See you around.